أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In our discussion this evening of the biography of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we will examine his marriage to Sawdah. Previously, we've examined the Prophet's marriage to Zainab bint Jahsh and the circumstances surrounding that marriage. One of the marriages of the Prophet ﷺ was the marriage that he had with Sawdah bint Zum'ah. It's not clear from historical accounts when exactly the Prophet married her, but she was the first woman the Prophet married after the death of Lady Khadija alayhi salam. So a lot of sources indicate that he married her in Mecca. And basically this is how it happened. She was married to her cousin. His name was As-Sakran ibn Amr. He came from the tribe of Bani Amir. When the Muslims were experiencing waves of persecution in Mecca, a lot of them migrated to Habasha, to Abyssinia, modern day Ethiopia. There were two waves of migration from Mecca to Habasha. The first was with Ja'far, the son of Abu Talib, the brother of Imam Ali alayhi salam. About 80 or so people went with him. Then there was a second wave of migration from Mecca to Habasha. Sawdah, along with her husband, who was also her cousin, they went to Habasha in that second wave of migration. They stayed there for a while, and then they came back to Mecca. When the migration ended, they came back to Mecca. When Sawdah and her husband came back to Mecca, her husband died. His name was As-Sakran ibn Amr. He died. So now, after all these years of struggles and sacrifices and leaving their hometown and spending time, literally being exiled from their city, and now that she came back, she lost her guardian and protector. The Prophet ﷺ felt responsible to take care of her. Khadija had died too, so the Prophet was not married at this point. He did not have a wife. And in fact, some hadiths narrated by Sunni sources, they say that Khawla, the daughter of Hukaym, she was the wife of Uthman ibn Mad'un. You know Uthman ibn Mad'un, he was one of the companions of the Prophet, one of the good companions of the Prophet. His wife, she came to the Prophet ﷺ. She told him, Ya Rasulullah, we see you so sad after Khadija, after she passed away. It's a good idea if you get married. We really encourage you to remarry, and we do recommend Sawdah as well. Sawdah, she's lost her husband, and it's good for you to be married. That will probably reduce the depression that you're going through or the sadness that you have over Khadija. So the Prophet, once he saw this decent lady trying to facilitate that, he accepted. And he said, okay, I'll marry her for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we find that the Prophet, when he married Sawdah, he was not looking for a young, beautiful woman, a virgin girl, as it was customary for those elite Arabs to always look after. No. She was a little bit, old. She wasn't very young. She was a widow. She had nothing really special to offer him. But the Prophet ﷺ, out of his care for women like that, who are now vulnerable, they lost their husbands and they sacrificed after the religion of Islam, they were persecuted. The Prophet said, okay, I'll take her in my care and I will marry her. So the Prophet wanted to show her compassion. So the Prophet ﷺ marries her, and then the migration to Medina happens. The Prophet moves to Medina. A number of sources indicate at this time he was married to Sawdah, and they went to the city of Medina. Lady Fatima alayhi salam was also with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Prophet comes to Medina, he secures a house, a room for Sawdah. So remember, she's the first wife that he remarries after Lady Khadija alayhi salam. And the Prophet is living in that house. There are some sources even indicate that Lady Fatima would for some time be in this house as well. Let's shed some light on the relationship of the Prophet between him and Sawdah, because there are a lot of hadiths that are disturbing about that. First of all, Sawdah, unfortunately, she developed strong ties with Aisha later on when the Prophet married Aisha. So the wives of the Prophet basically were two groups, two camps, two parties. You had the party of Aisha and the party of Salama. Who was with Aisha in her party? Hafsa was with her. Who else? Sawdah. Sawdah also sided with Aisha. Whereas Salama and a number of other wives, they were from a different party. And the party that would come up with conspiracies, we know which party it is, because in Surah Al-Tahrim, Allah makes it very clear. Those two wives and the tafsir makes it very clear who they were. Which side was usually conspiring against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sawdah, unfortunately, she goes under the influence of Aisha, and she basically sides with her in certain positions. This is what we understand from some of our hadiths. Now there are problematic narrations that Sunnis have narrated, which we're going to refute and present our analysis of them, and then enter a very, very important discussion about a few verses in the Quran. So the hadiths that are narrated in a lot of Sunni sources is that the Prophet marries Sawdah in Mecca, then he migrates to Medina, and then at this time Sawdah is growing older and older. So the Prophet is no longer interested in her. Because now he's got younger wives, she's getting old. He was no longer interested in her. So one day he signaled to her, let's separate. He gave her the intent that he's going to divorce her. In fact, some Sunni hadiths claim he did actually divorce her. Like, okay, I no longer need you. Ma'as-salama. Go, I divorce you. There are Sunni sources that say he did divorce her, whereas other sources state he threatened to divorce her. So one day, as the Prophet was passing by in the street, she sat on the street literally crying and begging him. She told him, Ya Rasulullah, did I hurt you? Did I violate you? Did I do something wrong that you want to punish me? He said, no, not really. She told him, why did you divorce me? I'm not interested in marrying any other man. And I want to be your wife. On the day of judgment, I want Allah to resurrect me as a wife of the Prophet. Why did you take that honor from me? The Prophet feels bad for her according to these hadiths. He says, okay, they were still in the raj'a period. When a man divorces his wife, there's a 3-month or 3 period cycles that they have to wait. She was in that. So the Prophet says, okay, come back. But she made a deal with the Prophet to encourage him to accept her back. In Islamic law, if a man is married to a permanent wife and he has multiple wives, he has to give each wife one night. So let's say a man has 4 wives. They are entitled by the Islamic law of equality to have one night with this person, with their husband. So it would be haram for this husband to spend 2-3 nights with one of his favorite wives and then skip some nights with another wife. This is haram. Unless she willingly says, you don't have to come. She's fed up with him too, get out of here. But she's entitled to that one night according to Islamic law. Okay. Sawdah, being the wife of the Prophet, she was entitled to a night. So when the Prophet supposedly divorced her, or he threatened to divorce her, she made a deal with him. She told him, look, if you take me back as your wife, I will give my night to Aisha. So she gets 2 nights, and I give up my night. I don't expect you to be intimate with me anymore, or even come and spend time with me. The Prophet accepted this deal, and he married her back, basically. Like I said, These are hadiths that we're going to refute. They're troublesome hadiths. And the claim is when this happened, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed verse 128 of Surah An-Nisa. وَإِنِ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا نُشُوزًا أَوْ إِعْرَاضًا فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَنْ يُصْلِحَا بَيْنَهُمَا صُلْحًا. Basically, those proponents of this idea and how they've applied this verse to this situation, the verse is stating, and if a woman is concerned that her husband is now repelled by her, or he's turning away from her, but she's willing to make a deal with him that, look, I'll stay in this marriage, let's not go to divorce, but I will relinquish some of my rights, right? And you can continue not spending time with me, but at least let's stay married. The Quran says, فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَنْ يُصْلَحَا بَيْنَهُمَا. There is no harm in them going back to one another and staying married. That's fine. If that's a deal that they reach, they willingly reach this deal, that's fine. We don't have a problem with that. They can do that. This is the linguistic meaning of the verse. So some claim that this verse was revealed telling the Prophet, yes, you didn't really want her anymore, but now that she's asking you and she's relinquishing some of her rights, it's okay, you can go back to her. You can stay in that marriage, as long as she's okay with it. So that's the meaning of the verse, and that's how they have applied it. So Bukhari and other sources are very clear that she gave up her night to Aisha because Aisha was the favorite wife of the Prophet. And in fact, a lot of these hadiths are narrated by Aisha herself. She claims that Sawdah gave up her night in her favor because she was the favorite of the Prophet's wives. Let's stop at this point here. The Prophet ﷺ, the Quran describes him, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You have the best moral standards and akhlaq. The reason why the Prophet married her in Mecca was why? He could have married another younger, more beautiful girl. Why did he marry her? She lost her husband. The Prophet wanted to take her in her care. Is it at all reasonable, based on your understanding of the personality of the Prophet, that now when he came to Medina, he married a younger wife or had other wives, and Sawdah's getting old, the Prophet wants to divorce her, is like, okay, I no longer need you? Do we ever see a similar practice by the Prophet ﷺ? Never in his lifetime do we see that. The whole reason why he married her in Mecca is because he wanted to take her in her care. Now that she's older and she's weaker, he's going to throw her out in the street and divorce her? What does your understanding of the Prophet's akhlaq tell you? That's not something a decent man would do, let alone the messenger of Allah. If someone does this in the community, how would you view this person? Be honest. You'd lose respect for this person, right? It's like this woman, this widow that you married out of your compassion. Now that you married someone else who's younger, you're going to tell her, okay, I'll divorce you. Not because she did anything specifically wrong, just because you're no longer interested in her. A decent man does not do that. Let alone a messenger of God who's an example for others. So right off the bat, we know these hadiths are fabricated. And if we want to analyze why they were fabricated, all the pointers point to this idea that Aisha had a tendency, or the group of Aisha, had a tendency to exaggerate her qualities and to show she was such a favorite of the Prophet, to the point where the Prophet ﷺ would go through all that just to show how much he loves Aisha. He accepted Sawdah back, so she would give up her night for Aisha. It just makes Aisha feel more special and seem to Muslims as being the special wife of the Prophet. So clearly, we see the motives behind fabrications like that. Otherwise, the Prophet's akhlaq, right off the bat, we know he would not do something like that. In fact, some of the wives of the Prophet, they gave him such a hard time, conspiracies, problems, yet the Prophet did not divorce them. Sawdah, a poor woman like Sawdah, the Prophet's going to divorce her? And then she has to beg him back and make a deal with him. Okay, I'll give up my night. That's not the akhlaq of the Prophet. So, this hadith is not acceptable at all. Any thoughts about these hadiths?
It is degrading the Prophet.
It is degrading. And remember, Orientalists pick up on these hadiths and like, oh, this is the founder of Islam. Very troubling. So we denounce these types of hadiths. Yes, brother.
I just wanted to say, like, the Prophet came as a mercy, to mankind. Character was the highest, morals were the highest. Do those who follow the books of Al-Bukhari and so on, like, do they take each hadith and let's say it's real, like those that go against
the staunch supporters of Bukhari, yes, will defend Bukhari.
So,
and sometimes they're blinded by their love for Aisha. If there's something in it for Aisha, they'll accept it, unfortunately, without realizing that they're degrading the Prophet. We've seen similar examples in our biography class. Remember when we talked about Abasa wa Tawalla and Uthman? And sometimes when you tell them, well, what if Uthman is meant by the verse? No, astaghfirullah, how could it be Uthman? Well, you accept it for the Prophet, but you don't accept it for Uthman? You degrade the Prophet, so you protect Uthman's image? Unfortunately, it happens. Sometimes the Prophet's dignity is sacrificed because they want to elevate others. That's very, very unfortunate. And one thing I'd like to share here, this is an important point. When you compare between the Ahlul Bayt school of thought and other schools of thought, you never find in our genuine school of thought ever we degrading the Prophet to elevate one member of the Ahlul Bayt. That's not something we ever do. Whereas when you look at other schools of thought, oftentimes other companions or wives are elevated at the expense of the Prophet's dignity. Keep that in mind. This is a very fundamental point. We never sacrifice the Prophet's dignity. If you have any claim from there are some ignorant speakers who say wild things on the pulpit here and there, but if you find anyone trying to make Imam Ali seem more important or Fatima Zahra, Imam Hussein, by lowering the Prophet, right off the bat, no, this is not the path of Ahlul Bayt. The Ahlul Bayt did everything to elevate the status of the Prophet. Never would they lower the status of the Prophet.
This is exactly the argument that they use to support their fallacies. They're like, if you guys raise the status of your 12 Imams above the Prophet, why can't we raise the status of the Ummah or whoever else it is?
Exactly, that opens the door for such an objection. So what we say is we never raise the status of the Imams at the expense of lowering the status of the Prophet. Never. In fact, we always, keep that high status of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if there's any hadith that could do that, we reject it right off the bat. We never compromise when it comes to the dignity and the status of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're very clear with that. Whereas with their companions, no. Oftentimes, we never have a scenario where there's something troubling in the Quran, like somebody did something inappropriate. We say, no, Imam Ali didn't do it, it was the Prophet. We never see. Show me one example where Shi'as have done that. But they do that constantly. Things that some other companions did to save their face, they attribute them to the Prophet. We never do that. Impossible. No Shia would logically think that. He'll accept something the Prophet did inappropriate, but not Imam Ali. No. These are ghulat maybe. They're kafir, extremist idolizers that have existed in history. But the genuine Shias will never accept that.
And that's surprising. Even in today's society, there is this misconception out there that, Shias may be idolizing Imam Ali and the rest of the Imams above the Prophet. I'm not sure if it's perhaps the method of communication when it comes down to commemorating the death and the birthdays of the different Imams as well as the Prophet, because during the course of the year we have birthdays and commemorations, and they happen equally in terms of what is being said about the qualities of the Prophet as well as the Imams.
Correct.
And as a result of that, they're confused. They're like, well,
you're giving more importance to Imam Hussein as opposed to the Prophet. Yes, sometimes that misconception does arise. There is some truth to it. And unfortunately, in some Shia communities, there is some sort of neglect towards the Prophet. I'll be very honest with you. You know, instead of dedicating more time to study the Prophet's life and knowing more about the Prophet and mentioning him more in their gatherings and learning from his lessons, sometimes we see that sidelined, right? And that's part of ignorance. It's out of ignorance, unfortunately. So there is some work that the Shias definitely have to do in terms of being more active with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So part of that criticism is valid. But it doesn't mean that they hold Imam Hussein in higher regard. Obviously, ask any Shia, even those who've been walking 2 weeks for Arba'een, they know the Prophet, the grandfather of Imam Hussein, has a higher status. They would never lower from that status. But yes, they might admit that we have some shortcomings towards the Prophet in terms of reviving his teachings and his legacy and his biography. Yes, that could be the case.
But it's natural psychology because you have 12 imams, so there are 12 birthdays, 12 commemorations.
Yeah, that quantity in itself. And remember, the area of persecution as well.
Right.
That is also, there's a historical factor there, right? The Shia held on to Imam Hussein because that was their only way to save the tradition of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So by reviving the message of Imam Hussein, that's an extension of the Prophet. It's an extension of the Prophet. Outsiders sometimes may not see the dynamics of that. Okay, having said that, and why we reject these hadiths, what about this verse in the Quran then? Verse 128 of Surah An-Nisa. وإن امرأة خافت من بعلها نشوزا أو إعراضا فلا جناح عليهما أن يصلحا بينهما صلحا والصلح خير. I'll read for you the translation. And if a woman fears from her husband contempt or evasion or neglect, there is no sin upon them if they make terms of settlement between them. And settlement is best. Okay. What is this verse stating here? Scholars of tafsir have mentioned that the reason why this verse was revealed, because at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a man by the name of Rafi' ibn Khudayj. Rafi' ibn Khudayj. He had 2 wives. One was older, and the second one was young and youthful. So Rafi' divorced his older wife because there were some disputes and tension between them. But before the iddah was over, that 3-month waiting period, he made a deal with his older wife. He told her, look, I'm willing to go back to you as a wife, but with new terms. You just have to accept that I love my youthful wife more, and I'll spend more time with her. So either we part ways, or you just accept this. So basically, she accepted his suggestion and the new terms of the agreement, and she figured, it's better than being divorced. So they made peace. Some people thought, well, on what basis did you make peace? You should have just divorced her. The new terms that you made are not acceptable. Some people thought that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this verse in the Holy Quran, stating if a woman sees that her husband is no longer interested in her, and he wants to divorce her, but she would like to make peace and comes with new, and she wants to come up with new terms that are acceptable for him, that's fine. They can do that, she can stay married. In other words, the Quran is not saying that they have to get divorced, that's it. If he cannot maintain justice with his wives, then he has to divorce them. The Quran says no. The discretion is given to the wife herself. If she accepts the new terms, and those new conditions are stated in the marriage contract, or they just agree upon that and make peace and they stay married, that is fine. They have that option. It's okay for them to do that. He's not obligated now to divorce her. Because a man could say, and he's being honest and realistic, he's like, look, I can't deal with them justly. One is 45-50, one is 25-30, right? And the guy is just being honest, he's like, I can't treat them equally. I just can't. So there was the impression that, okay, now that you can't treat them equally, you have to divorce the older wife. You have to. Okay. This was the impression. Allah revealed this verse in the Quran stating, no, you don't have to. If the husband talked to his wife, they came up with new terms of agreements, and she was okay with it, they can go back to each other, that's fine. Give them that freedom to do that. Give them that flexibility. Do you see the idea of the verse, or it's still vague? Do you have any problem with the verse?
We can't swear God.
No, I don't mean with the word of Allah, but this interpretation, the interpretation of the verse. Of course we don't, the Quran is on our heads.
And He made it easier for us men. So. No, I'm just kidding.
What do you say? Do you find this tafsir troubling? Is there something troubling about it? See, there was a case in society where the man was no longer interested in his wife. So he thought that if I'm not interested in her, I have to divorce her then. I can't stay in this situation. So his wife thought about it, and he was honest with her. He told her, look, I just cannot treat you like I treat my other wife. I'm unable to. So let me just divorce you. She said, look, don't divorce me. It's okay. You know, now that you're just being honest, you're telling me you can't, I'll accept this. That's fine. I'll live with you however you want. I am willingly going to accept that. The Quran said she has the right to make those terms with him. They can stay married. He doesn't have to divorce her. That's all the verse is stating. Is this problematic?
No, it seems like it benefits the wife.
Exactly. Remember, she's still under his protection. He's still spending on her. She's not interested at this age to go and find another husband to live with. She's not interested. She's like, look, khalas, I'll just live with you. That's fine. You know, you want to favor that other wife? I'm okay with it. I don't want you to divorce me. So people thought that he had to divorce her in that case. The Quran came to say no. They don't have to be divorced. If she accepts and he accepts, that's fine. They can live as a married couple. That's okay. So is there anything problematic? Yes.
In the tafsir of and the linguistic definition for Nushouz in Surah An-Nisa, verse I think 30.
We'll get to that right now.
Over there.
The wife beating verse. I'll get to that.
Right. Over there, Nushouz, as far as I know, Nushouz over there is explained as, you know, it's you know, infidelity in marital, you know, relations. So over here, is Nushouz defined differently, or even over there? Because in this explanation, in this interpretation, there's not.
See, the linguistic meaning of Nushouz is someone who does not fulfill their obligation. That's all it means. It's a type of rejection, right? Rejecting one another or rejecting to fulfill your obligation. That's just the linguistic meaning of Nushouz. So, in this verse that we just spoke about, the way the Quran is using the word Nushouz is the man no longer being interested in his wife, so he's not fulfilling the obligation of spending, let's say, time with her. In the other verse, the Nushouz is the wife not making herself physically available, not infidelity. No. Nushouz does not mean infidelity. It means the wife physically not making herself available to her husband. We'll talk about that verse. So the linguistic meaning of Nushouz is just to not fulfill a responsibility or to avoid one another, not interested in one another. That's all it means. There is no embedded meaning of infidelity. Socially, is that how people think of it?
Well, it's a verse that I've wrestled with a lot, and the best so far that I've come up with, and I'm open to changing my mind, is something that Dr. Abdul Halim in Oxford, he said Nushouz is just that rejection of marital duty, where not even
because of infidelity.
Because of infidelity, because it says when takhafa, when else would a man fear? It's not you didn't do my bidding and make chai for the in-laws, therefore فَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. It's a man would be scared
when you're concerned,
he's concerned when her loyalties are now with a different man.
Right.
And so therefore it's that 3-part process.
That could be one application of the verse. But if we want to stick to the linguistic meaning,
Sure.
then it simply
Even linguistically, doesn't Nushouz have that animosity and hatred that she's now becoming?
Yeah, like I said, rejection. They're not interested in one another. Or not fulfilling their marital responsibilities.
Even high-handed, like, no, it's not my duty to go and, because there are
Yeah, being high-handed too, of course. But remember, the Quran, just like it uses nushouz for the wife, it uses it for the man. Like in this verse.
So that's what I'm saying, but over here...
So it's not just infidelity.
No, I agree, but in this interpretation, the one with, I forget the companion's name, who had the two wives, one was older, one was younger. I might have missed it, but I didn't see where he had that rejection. He just sort of lost interest and he said, okay, now, kind of like the one that the Sunnis accused Rasulullah of.
Well, see, basically, what happened is when he was more interested in his younger wife, he fell short on some of his obligations. Right. So he started spending less time with her. And basically, when he found himself in that position, he's like, okay, let me divorce you because I don't want to stay in this situation. Right? So in the case of this companion, he did fall short. Now, the reason why he fell short of his marital duties is because he was not interested in her anymore.
Was he disgusted?
No. He would just basically that wife was.
I'm trying to fit the word Nushouz into.
No. He was not disgusted by her.
Into his scenario.
And basically he accepted her back as his wife. He was just not interested in spending that much time with her. So out of 4 nights, he'd spend a lot more time with the other one. And maybe he'll stop by and see this one, right? But he'd still spend on her. He still was living, but he fell short on the time aspect.
So he wasn't being just.
He wasn't being just with the time, exactly. Otherwise, he was not disgusted by her. He just wasn't that much interested, like the other one. He did have some interest, not that much. So that's the meaning of nushouz with the man. Now, the Quran, in the verse immediately after this verse, so after verse 128, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse 129 warns men. The sisters are going to like this verse. They will love it. Allah warns men. Listen to this verse. I know you felt troubled hearing this whole story. It's like, oh, look at these poor wives having going through the...
I think the class just ended now.
Well, it's better to examine it briefly now
No, I'm just kidding.
than postponing it till next week where we have to look at it in
I'm
depth.
just joking, I'm sorry.
So Allah warns men and tells them, look, don't put yourselves in situations like that where you're going to do injustice to the wife and then one of them, she has to be in midair, not knowing what to do. Her husband, the Quran uses that, كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ, hanging, just like that. So the Quran says, وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتُمْ. Allah says, look, you men, you won't be able to be just with your wives. Be careful. If you're going to marry another wife, make sure that you're confident you're going to be just with them. But if this is going to happen, you're going to start spending more time with the other ones and then disregard the other one, and then you won't give her rights. That's unacceptable. So, even though Allah does mention in the previous verse, okay, there's room for reconciliation, let them stay married, but Allah then warns men, don't put yourself in a situation like that. That's wrong. They skip this verse, huh?
128 goes to 130.
Yep.
In any case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did reveal this verse to warn men, just to be responsible, right? Don't just go and marry out of desire and then you get stuck in a situation like that. Even if you marry a second wife, let it be purposeful. Let there be a reason for it, a valid reason for it. Now this is the nushouz for a man, when a man loses interest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also in Surah An-Nisa, He talks about the nushouz of women. And that is, I believe, in verse 34, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse 34 speaks about men being the maintainers of women. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, this is probably the most controversial verse in the Holy Quran these days, وَاللَّاتِ تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ. And those wives, the women, that you fear or you're concerned about them committing nushouz, we'll explain what nushouz is. The Quran prescribes 3 steps to fix this problem of nushouz. 3 instructions from the Quran. فَعُذُوهُنَّ, number 1. وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, number 2. وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ, hit them, number 3. And that's why this is called the wife-beating verse, especially by those Islamophobes or those who are critical of the Holy Quran. How do we understand a verse like this? A lot of people say God, with all His might and all His rahmah, and God is the legislator, He commands men to beat their wives? What kind of religion is this? Yes, brother.
I think you talked about this last year, the year before. I don't remember when. Well, isn't it that you can't leave a bruise mark? Something like that. I don't know what it was.
We'll talk about the details, yes. We'll get about the details. Let's just put some quick perspective about this verse to understand it. Marriage is a contract between the husband and a wife. Nobody can force you into this contract. That's why in the religion of Islam, the consent of the wife is a condition for the marriage to be valid. If she's forced, Islam does not even recognize the validity of this marriage. It's a consensual contract. Okay. Whenever you enter a contract with someone, you have to honor that contract. If you make a business contract, political contract, whatever it is, there are consequences. A legal contract comes with consequences. If one of the parties decides to not fulfill their side of the contract, their obligations, and they want to break that contract, aren't there consequences? In society, legally, you could be fined, you could go to jail for breaking contracts. So marriage is one of the most serious contracts in your life. Breaking that marital contract is a big violation. It's wrong, it's unjust, and there must be consequences. Okay. The husband has his obligations. He has to provide financially for his wife. He has to spend on her, clothing, transportation, food, whatever it is. He has to give her the time that she needs. There are responsibilities that he has to honor. The wife also has marital responsibilities. And one of the marital responsibilities is her making herself available physically to the husband for intimacy. He also, of course, has to honor that as well. But this is part of the contract. Okay. Now, let's say a wife, for no reason, breaks this contract and she says, no, I'm not sleeping with my husband anymore. Well, why? Do you have a medical concern? If she has a medical excuse, that's fine. She has that right. What's a medical concern? Let's say it's harmful for her. She's going through a medical condition. She cannot be intimate anymore. That's fine. That's to be respected. Or let's say her husband has AIDS. She says, I don't want to acquire AIDS or HIV or whatever it is. Or he has a STD. I want to protect myself from that. That's a valid, legitimate excuse. Okay. So assuming that's not the case, she has no medical excuse, it's not harmful to her, and the husband is not abusive. Because remember, if he's abusive or he falls short of his responsibilities and he decides to beat her or he decides to not spend on her, she no longer has to make herself available. If the husband, the next few months he says, I'm not spending on my wife anymore, let her go work. If he does that, she doesn't have to make herself available to him anymore. You broke the contract? I don't have to honor my side of the contract. You see the idea here with the contract? Now, if the husband is honoring his side, he's spending on her, he's not abusive, he's doing everything that a responsible man should do, and she has no excuse for not making herself available to the husband. She either wants to hurt him, hurt the relationship, or maybe she has an affair with someone, or she's interested in someone. See, no legitimate excuse. Maybe at work she's met someone and she's like, you know what? Let me get rid of this husband. I don't want to be intimate with him anymore. Well, why? Do you have a legitimate excuse? She doesn't have a legitimate excuse. Islam says this is a breach of contract. She's now nashiz. From her side, she's breaching the contract. She's refusing to make herself available for the husband. This has consequences. Because see, when a wife does not make herself available to the husband, what are the consequences on the marriage? The marriage fails. Intimacy is very important to glue the marriage. Now, when the husband is not, getting his fulfillment at home, what's naturally going to happen? He's going to look elsewhere for that intimacy, and that destroys the marriage. He's going to enter into another relationship, right? That's naturally what happens. So if the wife has no excuse in not making herself available to the husband, the Quran says we have a problem here. We need to solve this. So what do you do about this? The Quran prescribes 3 steps. Step number 1, فَعْظُهُنْ. You, the husband, go, give her advice, talk to her, see what's the matter with her. Something bugging you, something annoying you, let's fix it, let's work on it. And maw'idha in Arabic means nice words of advice, admonishment. Just talk to them, tell them, look, this is not okay. This is taking a toll on the marriage. Let's fix this. Hopefully that should solve the situation. If the husband is polite, respectful, and if she really has an issue, a concern, a problem, he should fix it. So that's the first step. See the beauty of the Quran. So number 1, فَعْظُهُنْ. Give them advice, talk to them, try to solve it in a nice way. It didn't work. The woman is not being responsive. All those words of advice out the window. She still refuses to make herself available to the husband. Okay, what do? Should you just let it go like that? Well, this is going to take a toll on the marriage. It's going to ruin the... Remember, it was a contract. She has to honor the contract. Nobody forced her to enter this contract. So she has to respect the terms of the contract if he's respecting the terms of the contract. It's not fair for him to respect his side, for her not to respect her side. It's not fair. So the Quran says as a second step, if the first step didn't work, some people, advice doesn't work with them, وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. Go on a strike. How? The Quran says to the men, show them that their behavior is unacceptable and that you will ignore them. Go sleep in a different room. Show them it's not okay for them to continue this behavior.
But the other room doesn't have the comfortable mattress in it?
So as an example, boycott them. If I want to use a word that gets the idea, boycott them. Put pressure on them that way. Yes.
I have a linguistic question.
Yes.
It says fil madaji'. I've heard one scholar actually say, because that was the understanding that I initially had too, which was just go sleep in a different room on the couch or something. He says no, fil madaji' means no, you stay in the same bed but you turn away from them.
Yes, yes. Scholars have mentioned both actually. Probably the hadith mentions both examples. So one level of boycotting them is to turn away from them in the bed. Like for him to give his back to her, to let her know that he's upset. This is not okay. Her behavior should not be tolerated like that. Let's try to work this. So if she's just being rebellious, the first level is turn your back in the bed. Yes, that's the first step. But another example scholars have given is that the next step after that is just to altogether go to a different room.
Only one of them has been mentioned by the imams?
Possibly both, because remember this comes in levels or examples. So the idea is don't sleep next to them anymore. Either put some distance by putting your back, or altogether go to a different room. So yes, scholars have mentioned that as well. Both examples are mentioned. Now if you see the linguistic meaning of وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ is ignore them or abandon them in bed. That's just the linguistic meaning. Well, what do you understand from that phrase?
Wajruhunna would be like, make hijrah.
Well, hajarahu means he, when you get in a fight with your brother or somebody, and then for 3 days you just stop talking to each other. What do you call that in English?
Ignore.
Other than ignore, do we have another term for it?
Cold shoulder.
Yeah, giving someone the cold shoulder.
Ignore.
Right? Ignore. In Arabic, they call this hajarahu. That's why the hadith says, "Man hajara akhahu al-Muslim thalathata ayyam falaysa bi-Muslim." The one who ignores his Muslim brother or boycotts him like that for 3 days and he doesn't talk to him anymore is not a true Muslim.
His brother, or?
No, any other Muslim. أخاه المسلم.
Okay.
Yeah, that means being on bad terms with other Muslims is haram in Islamic law.
What if that person was a bad person?
Yeah, if that person is harming you, of course protect yourself from their harm. But if it's a dispute over an issue, you've seen people, they have a dispute, they start talking to each other, it's haram. So this is called hajr. Yes, the hijrah comes from the root word because now you're leaving, abandoning your old place and going to a new place. It's the same concept, but hajarahu means he boycotted him, he ignored him. Yes.
I feel like I'm missing something, because if the woman is acting like this to begin with, and she doesn't want to be with him, why would she care if he turns his back on her and goes in another room?
That's a good question. So basically, the woman in this example, she is living with the husband. She's still living with him, but she's just not allowing she's not making herself physically available for him. But she's still sleeping in the same room with him, but she does not want physical intimacy. So when the Quran says do that, it's a way, it's just an expression to say boycott her. And that's why scholars have mentioned go in a different room, do some other things. Because they don't take the verse literally, they're taking the spirit of the verse. And in Arabic, if you want to say, ignore someone, stop talking to them, just turn your back on them, basically. When you sleep, turn your back on someone. That means you're upset. Show the wife that you really are upset, that this is important, right? So, by the way, there are multiple tafsirs of this verse. Brother Ali, you mentioned the other tafsir where a man is sensing that his wife is probably being intimate with someone else, and he detects her lack of interest in him because of that. So the Quran says, give them advice, warn them, admonish them. If that doesn't work, then stop being intimate with them, right? Turn your back in bed. That's another tafsir. It's not a common tafsir that the hadith supports. It's just a new understanding, reading of the verse. But if you look at the ahadith that explain this verse, that's not the tafsir they present. They present the first tafsir that we're talking about.
So if somebody doesn't want to just look at hadith period and that Quran is the authentic source, then how do you rectify that?
Well, when someone examines a verse in the Holy Quran, because the Quran can have a number of interpretations, it's important to know which tafsir those who had authority gave us, right? So it's very important to know what the Prophet or the Imams commented on this verse. I cannot just take a verse like that and let's look at this linguistically and what it means. Yeah, it's not possible. Yeah, the linguistic meaning helps us with the overall tafsir. Linguistic analysis of the Quran is beautiful. It makes you better appreciate the tafsir. But it cannot make you create your own story of what's going on. You would have to refer to the tafsir. Yes?
One question about this second thing, which is to stay away from them in the bed.
Yeah, to boycott them, yeah.
Is it just a kind of punishment and warning to them, or can it also mean that it's not beneficial for the marriage at this time, if this is what the relationship looks like, for you to even be close to each other at that time?
Basically, it's a punishment for them. It's a punishment in the sense that you, the wife, now that you're not honoring the marital contract, there will be consequences. And the consequence is that I'll boycott you. Now, a lot of women under that pressure, they might change their behavior. A lot of women will tell you, the worst thing is for my husband to ignore me. Right? Have you heard that? The worst thing is for my husband to ignore me. Ignoring her like that for a prolonged period of time, for some women that is effective. And they'll reconsider the violation of the marriage contract.
Could it also be like, okay, put it on pause, there could be other issues in the marriage? I mean, marriage isn't only about that, but maybe the other things need to be fixed.
But like what other things?
I mean, I don't know, other factors in your life that could be affecting how close you are to each other. I don't know, I'm just asking.
Like just not listening to her husband whenever, I guess when he wants something or wishes something else. Like don't go outside at this particular point in time. So you said, referring to examples like anything else, could you use that second reason as a boycotting mechanism due to the fact that she's not listening to you for those other wishes that you may have? But I think from that standpoint now, if you're being just or not,
You mean if the wife is making other...
don't go to the mall today,
Okay. So he tells her don't go to the mall today?
but she does anyway.
She does. So then he should boycott her. Okay, if he has a legitimate reason
That's not
why...
what- yeah.
Oh,
If he has a legitimate reason why he's preventing her from something or she's doing something inappropriate, then yes. You know, we can take the spirit of Quran, that number one, advice, good words, talk to her. If that doesn't work, then apply pressure. Through boycotting, for instance, or through ignoring. Yes, of course. We can take the spirit of Quran and not just this fundamental problem in the marriage, but any other problem in marriage, it can be solved through this way, absolutely. If one side is doing something wrong.
so I'm interested now to hear what the other problems could potentially be that you may be referencing.
No, I meant like marriage as an institution, it could be built on like what creates love, what the friendship between the husband and the wife, and how.
Yeah, but by him turning his back, what is that achieving? To work on other areas of the
Quran is
marriage?
already saying like if you have a problem in your marriage, it's not the right time for that. So like stay away from each other.
No tafsir supports that, yeah. And even if you consult like counselors, psychologically, physically, all counselors, when they're doing marriage counseling, they definitely recommend the intimacy should be there. It always will speed up the recovery in other areas as well, definitely. There is rarely a case where a counselor would, tell them, okay, stop being physically intimate with each other and work on other issues. It just makes it worse. And makes them more cold towards each other, definitely. So that's not a meaning scholars have understood from the Quran. So this is the second step. Now let's say this doesn't help either. She doesn't care. In fact, she's happy that he's turning his back on her, let's just say. Remember, you still need to save the marriage. So the Quran, as a last resort, says something that a lot of people find controversial. وَضْرِبُوهُنْ.
How is that saving the marriage?
We'll talk about that.
I'm not quite.
No, we'll talk about that. Yes, brother.
Question, does Islam
That's like-
advise going to a therapist to deal with the marriage problems?
See, the Quran gives us an example during that time, that if there's a marital problem, go and bring an arbitrator from her family, an arbitrator from your family, as counselors who will work on the case. So yes, the idea of going to a counselor is mentioned in the Quran. But at the time, they didn't have counselors like we do today. The way to resolve these matters is to have someone from her family represent her, someone from his family representing them, and then they could work it out. But yes, the idea of going to a counselor is actually an idea that Islam recommends. Of course, a counselor who's aware of our laws as well, not somebody who's going to take you the other way. Because there are some counselors who go by different standards. We have to make sure it's a moral standard that's compatible with the religion of Islam. So the Quran says, وَضْرِبُوهُنْ. What does this mean? وَضْرِبُوهُنْ. The word ضرب in Arabic has many meanings, right? They call it the wife beating verse, but that's not fair because beating in Arabic the word ضرب can be used to refer to beating, but it has many meanings. One of the meanings of ضرب is to travel.
Really?
Yes, Allah mentions in the Quran, إِذَا ضَرَبْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. When you strike the earth. Striking the earth in Arabic is another way of saying traveling. It's just an Arabic expression. Allah uses that. So Allah uses the word ضَرَبَ in the Quran to refer to traveling. That's one meaning, to travel. By the way, some people today, without evidence from hadith of course, they've taken this meaning and tried to enforce it on the Quran, on this verse, and say, if she's being unresponsive, rebellious, just go on vacation, go on a honeymoon with her, travel. Yeah, travel with them. Some are saying it, but scholars have not really accepted it because the flow doesn't help, the context doesn't help, and the tafsir doesn't help either. But it's an interesting idea. Right? Sounds good, huh? Go on vacation, travel, just change the environment. So that's one meaning of dharb. Another meaning of dharb is to gently strike something. Have you seen someone doing tayammum? In fact, the hadith in describing tayammum says, hit the ground. Now, does it mean go beat the ground, do tayammum? No. Basically, you just take your hands and you gently strike the earth. Like that to do the tayammum. That's also dharb. That's one form of darb. In Arabic we call it darb. Yes, and then beating someone is also darb. So now you can't right off the bat take this meaning, this word in the Quran, darb, and say, okay, the Quran is saying go beat those women. No, that's unfair. We have to see what the Quran is suggesting here. And what the Quran is trying to communicate. We have to go to the tafsir. That's why it's important now to go to the tafsir of Ahlul Bayt to see what the meaning of darb is. So as a last way, as a last resort to save the marriage, the Quran tells the men, okay, hit them, strike them. How do we automatically rule out beating, like physical abuse? First of all, it doesn't help with the marriage. You beat someone, what, they're going to love you? Unless the person is, I don't know, has psychological issues, they'd like to be beaten. They're sadistic or they're whatever. But it usually doesn't help.
I forgot what's it called. Some do.
UFC?
No.
What's UFC?
No, I know, I'm
Ultimate
honest.
Fighting Championships.
There's,
WWF?
there's people out there, from men or women, they like that. I forgot what's it
But
called.
yeah, but that's,
It's not common.
it's unnatural.
Yeah, no.
It's unnatural. In a natural marriage situation, beating the other person is not going to help. It's going to make them rebel more, and not be interested. So right off the bat, it doesn't make sense to say, okay, go and beat her. It's not going to solve anything, right? So already we know that's not what the Quran means here. So let's go to hadith. What is the hadith suggesting? The Imams of Ahlul Bayt have given two examples with these conditions. Number one, if he wants to hit her, he hits her with a toothbrush. Siwak. Have you seen the old toothbrushes? What were they made of? Like the twig of a tree? Have you seen them? They're this big. The natural type of doing of brushing one's teeth. The Imam says he'll hit her with that siwak. The second condition, when he is lifting his arm to hit her, his underarm should not show. So basically you have your arm to yourself and you go like that. See, like that, can you hit hard? If your underarm needs to be closed and you want to strike something, can you strike hard? Try it. Can you? Yeah, if you raise your hand, you can hit someone hard. But if your underarm is closed, can you strike hard? Do your best. Like, how hard can you hit? You can't. Exactly, you can't. Because the momentum that you'll be hitting with is much lower. So the Imam says these are two conditions, right? He cannot raise his hand. His underarm must be closed. That's how he would strike her. Well, the question is, what point does this serve? This type of hitting, what does it mean? Why is this effective back then in that society? Let's just understand the context of the verse as well. Any ideas how this would be effective?
Well, like maybe it shows how frustrated the man is, like that he had to resort to that third, option.
That's a good idea. You're on to a good point. One idea is that when the man uses this measure as a last resort, remember, he's responsible, he's honoring his side of the contract, she has no excuse, he's given her advice, he's trying to boycott her, nothing has worked. Nothing has worked. As a last resort, the man in that society threatens the wife. It's a threat. That look, I'm not going to physically hurt you because you can't physically hurt her with these conditions, but this is serious. And this needs to stop. Look, you're bringing to such a point where I have to do this. For a lot of women in that society, this was enough for them to change and to honor their contract, to honor their side of the marriage. And so basically, some scholars have even phrased it this way. It's a way to break the ice with her. That look, you're being so silly, so unreasonable, khalas, just stop. For God's sake, just stop. And that's just a symbolic way of conveying it. Because look, the reality is, if a wife sees her husband carrying a toothbrush and doing like that, she's going to laugh. Let's be serious. She's going to laugh, right? So it's a way to break the ice and just remind her of her silliness, that she's acting silly and this needs to stop. So it's just a symbolic expression. This is one analysis of scholars. Yes.
Shia translation on purpose, and it says be.
Exactly. See, that's the problem when it comes to translation. You cannot accurately translate the Quran without properly reading the context and the tafsir, and knowing that each word has multiple meanings.
Why would
So
they
yes,
use that word be when it's not remotely accurate? They could have chosen one of the other ones that is similar and then put a.
yeah, that's a criticism. That's a criticism for them. Or they just take the apparent meaning of darb, beat. One of the meanings of darb is beat. It's a common meaning. It's not an uncommon meaning. So they maybe, or they just probably took that from other Sunni tafsirs.
I mean, pat would have been better.
Of course.
Right? Not that I know anything, just saying, if you're gonna translate it for people, that's what it gets, it looks bad.
It's very important how these verses are translated, definitely.
I mean, that's the reason why they say, there aren't really any good English
Translations
out there. So there's a
Exactly, because, but this is just one example. There are hundreds of examples in the Quran where the translators fall short of conveying the proper meaning of the word. Yes, brother.
Let's say this verse was like acceptable 6th century Arabia. I think today it's not as acceptable as back then, because now I think it'll be turned into two different ways. Like say your husband comes at you with like a toothbrush. Today's society, it's gonna look not like weird. It's gonna be like we live in a very sensitive time, where if something happens like that, they're gonna frame it as abuse right away. So I don't think it's gonna work ever again. Ever since that time period.
Well, see, the scholars are saying that we need to take the spirit of the Quran and see how this was a problem and what steps the Quran recommends to solve the problem. So scholars today are saying take the spirit of the verse. If this method that we discussed is not going to solve the problem in our marriages today, well, don't be literal with these steps. Find another way that's effective in terms of giving advice, in terms of boycotting them. And by the way, we have hadiths about that from the Prophet ﷺ, in which he tells us how to boycott them. The Prophet says, if you're the financial provider of the family and she's acting like that, give her less money. Put pressure on her financially. Less clothing, less money, less less going to the mall. Less going to the mall, right? Going to the mall less. The Prophet says in one hadith attributed to him, see, that's how you put pressure on them. To basically pressure them to change. You see this type? So even this is mentioned in the hadith, by the way. I'll share with you the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
What verse is it?
As-Saduq narrates this. He says from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Inni ata'ajjabu mimman yadhribu imra'atah wa huwa bil-dharbi awla." The Prophet says, I am shocked or surprised at the one who hits his wife, and he's the one who deserves the beating, not his wife. Beautiful words from the Prophet. Then the Prophet says, لا تضربوا نساءكم بالخشب فإن فيه القصاص. Don't hit your wives with an object, because then there's retribution. You hurt her, according to Islamic law, she can take you to court and she can hit you back, or have someone hit you. So see, the Prophet is very clear that you don't have the right to physically be abusive with your wife. But if there is a problem and they're not honoring their marital obligations, pressure them. وَلَكِنْ اضْرُبُوهُنَّ بِالْجُوعِ وَالْعُرِي. However, if you want to pressure them, you want to strike them. If you want to strike them, go on a strike. How so? Deny them some of their luxuries that they have. So give them less money, less food, less opportunities to go to the mall and buy clothes. See, this is a very beautiful hadith from the Prophet that kind of explains the spirit of the verse. So to address the question or the objection that you raised, we have to take the spirit of the verse and see what's the most practical way to save the marriage, and to let the woman know that, look, this is unacceptable. Question: how come the Quran doesn't allow her to hit him if he's not making himself available? How come the Quran didn't mention that scenario?
Because not all women are bodybuilders.
First of all, it's very unlikely in societies for a woman to be able to hit the man. In fact, if she would threaten any type of physical violence, she would get beaten up by the husband. So that's not good advice that you give to the wife, right? Because it's not practical. It really isn't practical. Even today, in most societies, there are some wives who beat their husbands, but it's pretty rare. Number two, it's rare for the husband to not make himself physically available to the wife. Yes. So the Quran talks about the scenario that's more common. That other scenario, there's probably one scenario that happened in history, and that was with Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, when she invited him and he said no. It doesn't happen that often, right? Even in marriages. If there's someone failing that aspect, usually it was the wife who would refuse to make herself available physically, not the husband. It could happen, but it's unlikely. It's much less. So the Quran usually mentions the more common case that would happen in a marriage. Now, when it comes to Nushouz, the beauty of the Quran is that it's saying when the wife is not fulfilling her responsibility, the man had the social and family authority to kind of threaten her and tell her stop, and let's save the marriage. But if he falls short of his responsibilities, you know what the Quran prescribes? The Quran says the wife does not really have the power to keep the husband in check and to kind of threaten him to behave. She needs a higher power in society. Who? The community, or the judges, or the qadi, or the arbitrators. If the husband is being negligent, and what is the wife going to threaten him with? Financially, historically, he's the provider, right? Physically, he's stronger. So what kind of leverage does she have over him if he's the one who's failing his responsibility? So the most practical way is to resort to the community. Get the other community members involved and threaten him to behave. Or take him to the judge, to the Islamic judge. You will force him. It's like, look, you're making a violation, there will be consequences. In fact, some scholars believe if the husband violates his terms of the contract and he does not honor it, he could be physically, hit with the, what do you call it? Whipped. He could be whipped in court. Yes. So if she can't whip him, she'll have the judge whip him. That's the idea. Maybe he wants to be whipped.
Is there an actual job whipping people in court?
Is there what?
Like an actual job whipping people in court? No.
No, I don't think so, no. Maybe in some societies there were whippers, I don't know. There's something that's similar that happens in Congress, right? What do you call it?
The whip.
The whip, yeah. Yeah, there are whippers in Congress. So, and by the way, the Maraja are very clear that, he is allowed to implement this verse as a last resort, of course, following the proper steps, if there is any chance that this is going to make her change her behavior. But if he knows it's going to be worse, then he doesn't have the right to do that. Number two, it should not be out of hatred and seeking revenge from her. That's haram. The third condition is that it should not leave any mark on her body. If her body becomes red or any type of mark, he has to give her the diyah. He has to give her the monetary retribution, and he committed a violation of God's law. So just keep that in mind as we try to better understand this verse. So any final thoughts before we conclude? Does this shed light on the verse and the conditions? Do you still find it, not the verse problematic, the verses of Allah are not problematic, but still this interpretation is problematic?
It gives us better understanding, actually.
Yeah, great understanding.
Because you can never defend that, It's to say, it's the...
Yeah, beat your wife, right.
But it's not a way of the Rasul and Ahlul Bayt would do something.
Exactly. And always, if you want to better understand the Quran, and this probably is more of a deterrent, right? So people stick to their marital obligations, is that look at the life of the Prophet and all the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. They had wives. That created a lot of trouble. But never, not once, does even a da'if hadith, a weak hadith, indicate that the Prophet or the Imams hit any of their wives. So that in itself sheds light on the Quran. If you really want to know Quran, look at the practice of the Prophet too.
It makes sense.
Yeah, so the idea is not to promote any physical violence. The idea is just sometimes when the wife is just acting silly, she's failing to fulfill her obligations without an excuse. Remember, without any excuse, sometimes the man has to be a little bit tough to tell her, this is unacceptable. That's the spirit of the verse. Yes, brother.
Did the Prophet or any of the Imams ever, like how you mentioned that hadith where they would, take away some of the resources from their wives, did they ever implement that with some of these problematic wives?
Possibly, yes. I cannot recall a specific source at this moment, but I will look into it, yes. In fact, Bukhari narrates, not our sources, Bukhari narrates that when Aisha and Hafsa started to create all that trouble for the Prophet ﷺ, 1 month he abandoned them. So see, that's the second part of, he did not take it to the third step where he would hit them, but the boycotting did happen. Bukhari narrates, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he went into the house of Aisha and he basically told her, shame on you. Look at what you're doing. People are even saying the Prophet is probably going to divorce you. You know what she told him? Bukhari, by the way. You know what?
He said he wouldn't dare.
No. She said something else. She told him, Umar, you want to object to me? Go start with your own daughter, Hafsa. Go talk to her. She's guilty of what I'm guilty of. Why are you lecturing me? Go lecture your own daughter. This is in where? Bukhari. I can show you the reference. So yes, we have the Prophet ﷺ kind of maybe boycotting them just to show the seriousness of the issue. So that there are indications sometimes they would do that. But never it would reach to the point where they would hit their wives. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.